At 7:12 a.m., while the sprinklers were still ticking and the neighborhood slept, a folded yellow notice appeared on my garden gate, and everything I thought I knew about my quiet HOA changed. It claimed my roses, stones, and wooden trellis were a serious safety hazard, demanded immediate access to my backyard, and warned of fines if I refused. I laughed at first. My garden had hosted birthdays, barbecues, and barefoot kids for years without a single scraped knee. But the paper trembled in my hands, because it wasn't just a complaint. It was a threat wrapped in official language, and it felt personal. I read it again, slower. The letter cited obscure bylaws, referenced emergency inspection authority, and listed a date for entry that was 2 days away. No phone call, no knock. Just an assumption that my locked gate would open because they said so. As the sun climbed, neighbors peeked from windows, pretending not to stare, and I realized this wasn't about safety. It was about control. Someone on the board had decided my garden offended them, and they wanted inside. I emailed the HOA immediately, attaching photos, measurements, and a polite request for clarification. Hours passed. Then a reply arrived, cold and clipped, repeating the demand and adding that refusal could escalate enforcement. That word, escalate, echoed louder than the birds. I called a friend who knew property law, and she paused before saying, "They can't just enter without permission." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by anger. If they couldn't, why were they trying? That evening, I walked the garden carefully, seeing it through hostile eyes. The stepping stones were level. The trellis was anchored. The pond was fenced. Nothing dangerous lurked there. Yet I imagined strangers opening my gate, stepping onto my soil, judging my choices. This space wasn't just landscaping. It was privacy, effort, and pride. Losing control of it felt like losing a piece of myself. As night fell, another email arrived. Same demand. New tone. Urgent. That's when I knew this wouldn't end quietly. The HOA wasn't backing down, and neither was I. Sleep came late, fractured by thoughts of locks, cameras, and boundaries. I printed the bylaws, highlighted contradictions, and photographed every angle of the yard. I checked the gate twice, then once more, listening for footsteps that never came. Somewhere, a board member believed authority replaced consent. Somewhere else, a line was being crossed. By morning, I had a plan, a timeline, and resolve hardening like concrete beneath fresh soil. Whatever happened next would test patience, rights, and the simple idea that home should feel safe against unexpected pressure from outsiders. The next morning, the HOA president called me directly, and her voice carried the practiced calm of someone used to being obeyed. She said the board was concerned, that complaints had been filed, and that entering my property was standard procedure. I asked who complained. She said that information was confidential. I asked what specific danger existed. She repeated the word potential. Every answer circled back to authority, instead of facts, and the conversation ended with her reminding me of the inspection date. By noon, an official-looking truck drove slowly past my house, paused, then continued down the street. Maybe coincidence. Maybe intimidation. I installed a temporary camera anyway, angling it toward the gate, and placed a printed notice stating, "No entry without owner permission." It felt dramatic, but so did the situation. Neighbors began texting, quietly admitting they'd received similar warnings over trivial issues. One had caved. Another paid a fine just to avoid conflict. That pattern explained everything. Pressure worked, so the HOA kept applying it. An email followed that afternoon, sharper than before. It cited escalating fines, legal review, and forced remediation. That phrase made my stomach drop. Forced meant without consent. Remediation meant altering my garden. I replied carefully, stating I denied entry, disputed the claim, and requested evidence. I attached the relevant bylaw sections showing inspections, required owner approval except in true emergencies. I ended by asking them to cease further attempts until the dispute was resolved. Their response came fast, too fast. They claimed an emergency existed because tripping hazards could not be ruled out, not could be proven, just not ruled out. The logic was slippery, like accusing someone of a crime because they might commit one. I forwarded everything to my lawyer friend, who replied with 3 words, "They're bluffing hard." That evening the gate rattled. I froze. The camera alert buzzed as 2 people in HOA jackets stood outside, clipboards in hand, peering through the slats. One tested the latch. It held. I stepped into view and spoke through the gate, calm but loud enough for the camera. "You do not have permission to enter." They exchanged glances, muttered something about reporting noncompliance, and left. My hands shook long after they were gone. Word spread quickly. By nightfall, messages poured in from neighbors thanking me for standing up, asking what they could do. That support mattered. It turned isolation into solidarity. I realized this fight wasn't just about my garden anymore. It was about setting a boundary the HOA had grown used to crossing. I drafted a formal notice disputing the hazard, claim and demanding all communication be in writing. I sent it certified. I saved every email, every video clip, every timestamp. If they wanted escalation, I would meet it with documentation. The garden sat quietly under porch lights, unchanged, defiant in its calm. Tomorrow the board was scheduled to meet, and I knew my name would be on the agenda. Whatever they decided, they'd learned one thing already. Intimidation only works until someone refuses to be intimidated. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for 6:30 p.m., and by 6:10 my driveway was already full of cars that didn't belong to me. Neighbors I barely knew nodded as they walked past, some whispering encouragement, others clearly nervous just to be there. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a place usually reserved for bland announcements and cookie-cutter decisions. That night, the air felt heavier, like everyone sensed something was about to break. When my item came up, the room quieted. The president cleared her throat and restated the claim. My garden posed a safety hazard and required inspection. I stood, papers in hand, heart pounding but voice steady. I asked them to specify the hazard. Silence. Then, a board member mentioned uneven terrain. I projected photos onto the screen showing level measurements. Another said water exposure. I showed fencing and signage. Each claim dissolved under evidence. And with every slide, murmurs spread through the room. Then I played the video of them trying my gate. Gasps followed. The president's face tightened. I explained calmly that attempting entry without permission violated both HOA bylaws and state law. I said I was not refusing cooperation, only unlawful intrusion. That distinction mattered. I wasn't being difficult. I was being careful with my rights. A neighbor stood and shared her story of fines over a flower pot. Another admitted he'd paid just to avoid trouble. The pattern became undeniable. This wasn't enforcement, it was overreach. The board shifted uncomfortably, realizing they weren't facing one homeowner anymore, but many. The HOA's attorney, clearly unprepared for resistance, suggested tabling the matter for review. I agreed, on the condition that all enforcement actions be paused and no further entry. Attempts be made. After a tense whispered exchange, the board voted. Motion passed. The hazard claim was suspended pending independent inspection. Only with owner consent. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with something stronger. Resolve. After the meeting, neighbors crowded around, asking how I'd prepared, what language I used, who I contacted. I shared everything. Knowledge, like boundaries, grows stronger when shared. One woman hugged me, whispering, "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." Driving home, the garden lights welcomed me back, unchanged and peaceful. Yet everything felt different. The HOA had been challenged publicly, and they'd backed down. Not out of kindness, but because they had to. I knew this wasn't the end. Organizations that rely on quiet compliance don't change overnight. But cracks had formed. I organized my documents into a folder labeled HOA Garden. I hoped I'd never need it again, but I was ready if I did. That night, for the first time in days, I slept deeply. The gate stayed closed. The garden stayed mine, and somewhere behind closed boardroom doors, a lesson was settling in. Authority questioned is authority limited. 2 weeks later, the HOA sent a final letter, and this time the tone was noticeably different. No threats, no deadlines, just a formal notice stating that after further review, my garden no longer qualified as a safety hazard. The independent inspection was canceled. The case was closed. I read it twice, then set it down gently like something fragile. Winning felt quieter than I expected, but also heavier, because I understood what it had taken to get here. The real change didn't come from that letter. It came from what followed. The HOA quietly updated its enforcement procedures, adding language about owner consent and clearer definitions of emergencies. At the next meeting, attendance tripled. Homeowners asked questions. They requested records. They challenged vague citations. The board still existed, but its posture shifted from commanding to cautious. Power hadn't disappeared, but it had been reshaped. My garden became a strange kind of symbol. People stopped by not to admire the roses, but to say, "This is the one, right?" I didn't love the attention, but I understood it. The space hadn't changed, yet its meaning had. It represented a boundary that held under pressure. That mattered in a neighborhood where silence had been mistaken for agreement for too long. One afternoon, I noticed a new sign on the clubhouse bulletin board. Know Your HOA Rights, Community Workshop. I smiled at that. Not because I enjoyed conflict, but because awareness was replacing fear. Even the HOA president avoided eye contact now, her authority tempered by accountability. We were still neighbors. We still waved. But the dynamic was different, grounded in mutual limits instead of one-sided control. At home, the gate remained locked, but I no longer checked it obsessively. The camera stayed up, not as armor, but as insurance. I went back to gardening for the joy of it. Hands in soil, mind quiet. The stress faded slowly, like tension leaving a muscle after being clenched too long. What lingered was confidence, earned the hard way. Looking back, the dispute was never really about a garden. It was about how easily rules can be stretched when no one pushes back, and how quickly they snap into place when someone does. I learned that politeness doesn't require surrender, and cooperation doesn't mean compliance without question. Most of all, I learned that standing your ground, calmly and documented, can ripple outward in ways you never expect. The HOA tried to enter my property and left with something else entirely, a reminder that homes are not suggestions, and rights are not optional. My garden still blooms, not because it was defended aggressively, but because it was defended clearly. And sometimes, clarity is the strongest fence you can build. If you've ever faced HOA drama or a Karen crossing the line, hit the like button, share your story in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping real-life neighborhood stories. You won't believe